As you just heard, I work for the World Bank. For those who don't know, the World Bank is a UN-affiliated agency which mandate is to finance poverty reduction programs in developing countries. And in probably the last 10, 15 years, we've grown increasingly worried about the impact of natural disasters on our mission. We see more and more disaster, we see more and more population affected, and what's the point of trying to lift people out of poverty if then they get affected by disaster and fall back into poverty? So I thought I would take you beyond the borders of these fantastic countries. You guys have a fantastic countries. You're lucky to really work in such a great nation, and take you to the developing world and tell you a little bit about the scale of the challenge that disaster represent for some, if not all, of these countries, and a little bit about what we're trying to do about it. We heard Dr. Chen earlier talking about the light at nights, which is a fantastic way to look at many things. These are pictures, in fact, that were taken by an American astronaut in one of the early flights of the shuttle. Apparently, when you're in zero gravity, it's very hard to sleep. That astronaut was getting bored. He took his camera and started taking pictures and produced these fantastic images, which actually are now used to do a lot of things. They give us a lot of information. This is Europe. I'm sure you can recognize the Middle East, North Africa. And from there, we can discover quite a few things. We can see my country, which is right there, and you can see Belgium. One thing is clear, Belgium has way too much electricity. We have nuclear plants. We don't know what to do with that electricity at night, so we lit up all the highways and the roads and everything. It's a huge waste, but you can see that Paris really is the city of light, right? And in fact, you can see the two only real megacities in Europe, Paris and London, two really bright spots. You can see that Egypt is not really a country. Egypt is a river, right? People move towards that navigation channel. They move towards center of economic activity. Nobody lives in the Sahara Desert. So this image actually tells us a lot about population density and economic activity around the world. And if we now move to Asia, for example, we can see, wow, right? This is Asia. These are people who are much poorer than people in Europe, right? So they don't use as much electricity. There may be every house has one or two light bulbs. And you can see area like Java, which is an island the size of England, not Great Britain, England, with 150 million people. You can see all the people who moved to the east coast of China. And I want to bring your attention to this part of the world there, which is kind of the fringe of the Himalayas, the Ganges basin. In fact, in this part of the world, you can see we've quite a few megacities. We have Dhaka, 15 million people. You have Mumbai, 18 million people. You have Karachi, 21 million people. And this is still growing. In our part of the world, yeah, some cities are growing, but others are not growing that much anymore. But in the developing world, this is an incredible phenomenon of growth. This whole area here, at the beginning of the 20th century, had probably less than 100 million people. Today, there is probably more than 700 million people living just in this area, right? And I want to show you the result of a genius American geologist who went to all the records of the British Empire, when monasteries after monasteries, went to look at every record he could find to document simply one hazard, right? One hazard, the occurrence of earthquake in this part of the world over the last few hundred years. And I want you to look at this picture, right? This picture tells us quite a few remarkable things. The first thing is, well, there's probably a seismic fault right there. In fact, there's a good reason why India is called the subcontinent. It's actually shifting, moving under and lifting the Himalayas. And that creates, of course, a major fracture and a seismic zone. But there's something else that's quite interesting about those dates. I don't know if someone has noticed this. Right, all these dates, except maybe for here, the Kashmir earthquake 2005, and one that's not there, which was the Kathmandu earthquake a couple of years ago. None of these events, these are all earthquake of magnitude 7 and above that had dramatic impact. None of these events have occurred in the last 100 years. Right? And so we have now in this part of the world probably more than 700 million people who are finally benefiting from the world economy, who are finally coming up to the modern world and building new houses, who have never experienced an earthquake. And in fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find public officials who are sensitized to the fact that a major earthquake, actually a major one, may occur in this part of the world because it hasn't triggered in 100 or 200 and 300 years. And for all of you who have traveled outside of the US, what do we see in this part of the world? We see this, right? This is a house in Kathmandu, highly seismic. Every disaster risk management experts know that Kathmandu is highly seismic, right? But people who live in Kathmandu don't necessarily know that this is a seismic zone. And it doesn't take a structural engineer to tell you that that house is probably not going to stand when it shakes, right? And you can't blame the guys building this house. It's probably making ends meet, being quite successful, finally able to build a house in bricks. He's put his family in one of the floors, rents the other floors, and just keep going like this. And I took this because I thought this was a striking example of some of the challenges that we're facing in the developing world. But the issue is not limited just to Kathmandu or the fringe of the Himalayas. It's the same problem in the favelas of Brazil, where people build wherever they can, where there is cheap land or free land on the slopes of hills, or this neighborhood which didn't exist 40 years ago in the suburbs of Mexico City. Right? Mexico City is one capital city that's on a seismic zone, actually not really on a seismic zone, but you have multiple capital cities which are on seismic zone, from Quito to Lima to Tehran to Algiers, Damascus. Imagine a major earthquake tomorrow in Damascus. Would anybody be able to help? Istanbul and others. And of course, that's one hazard. That's earthquakes, right? But these populations are exposed to all sorts of storms, cyclones, heat waves. The World Bank, we recently released a tool for every project managers to assess whether their project is in a hazard area. Of course, every project is in a hazard area, but what hazard and to what level? And we have I think we have 12 different types of hazard, from river floods to coastal floods to heat waves and other hazards. And these are Hurricane Irma and Wilma last summer. When I started in working on disaster risk management about 15 years ago, a hurricane category 5 was a bit of a myth. You'd had Hurricane Andrew a few years earlier, but a category 5 was kind of something you almost never saw. And in the last 2-3 years, how many have we seen, right? How many have we seen that actually make landslides? For some reason, Hurricane Irma and Maria, by the way, were the fastest emerging category 5 in history, and one of the largest hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic basin. So something may be happening. And so we don't only have just incredible growth in population and assets exposed to adverse natural events, one factor equation, we also have increased variability in some of these hazards, probably increase in intensity and frequency. So we have a two-factor equation, and we're getting really worried that instead of having a linear increase in losses, we're simply going to start having an exponential increases in loss in many of these countries. The result is this incredible increase in losses that, of course, is affecting our mission. But so my point here is then, what do we do about it? I mean, is this so big that we can do it, or do we rely on rapid responders to just take care of the problem? I think everybody agrees that that's not going to make it. In fact, I think over the last, I'd say 10 years, we've really come at the realization at the World Bank, but I would say it's the same is true in the entire development community, that this is not just one problem that can be siloed. This is an issue that has to be addressed in every single sectors. And in fact, this image is an exercise done with the government of Turkey, with every single ministry is trying to pinpoint and identify what are really the elements where we can intervene, or where the government can intervene, or communities can intervene, and universities can intervene, to try to change the landscape and try to gradually reduce this process of creation of risk and try to reduce vulnerability overall. Today, almost every sector in the World Bank has programs related to disaster risk management, whether it's, we just talked about territorial planning, which is essential. It's not just how you build a road. Is it resilient? Does it block the drainage system? But it's where you put the road. If you put the road in a floodplain, this is particularly true in developing countries, that's where the population is going to be in 10 years. So if you put the road in a floodplain, you're going to have a flooded population 10 years from now. It's about fiscal management. Can countries absorb the financial shock of disaster? This is particularly true for small and medium states. If you're a small island state and you get hit by a cyclone, I mean, look at Puerto Rico, which is probably not a small state in terms of compared to some of others, but the whole economy stops. Can you still pay your public servants? Can you service your debt? Can you continue? Can you get your economy started again? What are the mechanisms can be used? Can you promote the use of insurance? Can you set up a particular program? It's about social programs, right? Can we make sure that vulnerable population are the one who are targeted for intervention to reduce the vulnerability, but also are the ones that get prioritized when a disaster hit? It's, as I said, in every single sector. At the World Bank now, every single project has to be screened, whether it's about, about debt management, whether it's about healthcare, it's about reforming the education sector. The project have to be screened for disaster and climate risk. We've developed all sorts of tools. The portfolio has grown dramatically. You can see here $5 billion a year, which is in the scale of the US is probably very, very small, but in the development community, this is actually a pretty big amounts. But I think the most exciting is not so much that we now have all sorts of, we now have program in every sector, is that we now really have all sorts of people engaged in trying to address this problem. We have, of course, we had engineers, but now we even have economists. I can tell you, to get economists to look at this type of problem took us years, because it's not something, economists like to look at economic growth. They don't really look at what brings it back down, and it's very difficult to get statistics on disasters. But finally, we have some very serious economists working on this. We have geographers, we have social workers, we have people working on a nature-based solution. We have people looking at how do you make decision under uncertainty, which is a big issue if you think about the fact that with disaster you can measure risk, but increasingly you have uncertainty due to a changing climate. We also have partnerships with a whole variety of partners, whether it's space agencies or Silicon Valley company or women activist group or NGOs who do fantastic work on the ground. This is becoming or has become really a thriving community and something that is bringing a lot of energy. Now, I don't want you to leave with the completely grim pictures of this challenge in the developing world, so I wanted to leave you with one thought and really what keeps us going at the World Bank, and I think in the development community in general, which is the fact that really if we realize that in the next 30 years in the developing world, we are actually going to build as much as since the advance of mankind. The developing world is just exploding right now. We're going to build 1 billion dwellings probably. That's 1 million dwellings a year in the next every week for the next 30 years. If we can work with these countries and help them make sure that these dwellings, this infrastructure is built at the right place with the right standards, that the right system are put in place, then I believe we can try to build a more resilient future and reduce disaster loss all over the world. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.